I'm Hannah Thyssen-Howard, and this is the wide world of wool, exploring sheep breeds. I've been crafting and making creatively for my entire life. I learned how to knit and crochet when I was 8 years old, and I learned how to spin about 15 years ago. My favorite material for all of these crafts has to be wool. It's versatile, functional, and comes in so many interesting textures. I can't wait to dive into this fascinating fiber with you. I've worked full-time in the yarn industry since about 2010, and my experience and independent research has been what's informed my opinions and information about wool. That said, this is a high-level overview, and you can always dive in and learn more from people who are much more knowledgeable on certain aspects of this whole system than I am. I'm constantly changing and reinforming my opinion by learning more about sheep and the people who raise them. Since I can't possibly share everything that I know with you, and there's so much information outside of what I know on this subject, I've included a list of resources for you in your workbook. I've also listed some books that you might check out. I have a few here to show you. And the workbook itself is a great asset. You don't have to have it, but it's a free download. All you have to do is give me your email in exchange so that we can keep in touch. And it's a very cool download. It has the list of some of the resources is in there, and also these exploration paths that I've built for you. These exploration paths are a great way to dive deeper into individual wool breeds and find out where to find them. Some of the books that I recommend in your workbook include the Fleece and Fiber Source Book. This is a beautiful book that mine has long ago lost its jacket, but it has fantastic breed-specific information throughout that will help you learn about individual sheep breeds. I consider this kind of the wool Bible, and I know I'm not alone in that. Another book to consider picking up at your local library or secondhand bookstore, or if you can get a new copy, that's great, is The Knitter's Book of Wool by Clara Parks. This is a really great entry-level book for people who are just dipping their toes into learning more about different types of fiber. For those of us who are a little bit deeper along on our journey and we want to really dive into individual local fibers and the local fiber movement domestically and abroad, I have to recommend Fiber Shed by Rebecca Burgess. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Fiber Shed movement here in a bit, but this is a really, really great resource. There are also some great magazines on the market that have spinning content. Spin-Off is one that I think a lot of you will know from Long Thread Media, and also Ply, which is independently published, is out of the Midwest and is just a fantastic spinning magazine. But even if you don't spin, it's something that you can find a lot of additional information about individual breeds and how fibers behave, because honestly, spinners are kind of the closest to the fiber out of anyone. If you're familiar with a lot of other fibers, you might be asking me, why wool? Well, there's a lot of reasons that I love wool, but I'm happy to break them down for you. Number one, elasticity. Elasticity is the stretchiness of a fiber. As with our own hair, some of it naturally curly and some of it's a little less naturally curly. My hair is very straight, so if I were to get my hair wet and then stretch it, it would break. It's very, very straight. However, if you have curly hair, you know that your hair has more room to stretch before it's at its full length. Similarly, sheep fiber presents as curly hair. It's a curly, fluffy fiber, and that curl is what we call crimp. Crimp is what gives wool increased elasticity or bounciness, gives it a memory of where it's been, and keeps it in the right shape for your project. This elasticity is also a little bit more forgiving for beginners who are just starting out, which is one of the things that I love about it. If you've ever had a particularly tight cast-on row, you might consider changing your wool to 100% wool if it's a wool blend, or if it's not wool, just switching over to wool. You'll find that that first row just gets easier and easier because the wool will stretch a little and give you some room. Number two, softness. Softness is simply personal preference. Some of us are going to find some wools softer than others, but I personally find lots of wools very soft. And I've worked my way up over time to be able to accept and wear more wools and coarser wools next to my skin. Yes, you can teach yourself to wear different wools over time. Exposure therapy does work for lots of us. Not all of us, but lots of us out here. And you can start with ultra soft wools, which luckily you'll find listed in your exploration path within the workbook, and work your way up to some of those more heavily textured wools over time. Number 3, warmth. I don't think anyone would deny that wool is warm. What you might not know is that wool is warm even when wet, which is why it's a top choice in places that get a lot of snow. When wool gets wet, it retains the heat of whatever it's against, meaning wool that's close against your body, when your body is warm and the outside air is cold, the wool will retain that moisture and the warmth next to your skin. That's why wool is a top choice to stay warm in subarctic temperatures. My 4th reason to love wool is its durability. Durability is the measure of how much beating a fiber can take before it begins to show it. Now, some of you are immediately thinking of that ultra soft merino and how it held up right away and it drove you crazy. That's not what I'm talking about. Wool as a fiber across the board is extremely durable. It can handle a lot of stress thanks to the high crimp and high elasticity that most wools have. And it's also stain and scent resistant, meaning that the fiber itself doesn't take on other liquids or foreign materials very easily. They have to be super ground in. And it doesn't take on scents really bad. Now, wool can have a strong smell of its own, but I personally like it. Reason number 5 to love wool, safety. Wool is self-extinguishing, unlike some other fibers like polyester that melt when they come into contact with heat or fire. Wool will light on fire but then put itself out. It doesn't transfer that burn to other objects. So it's one of the safest materials for firefighters to wear, and that's why they use wool blankets to put out fires. In addition to all these great reasons to love wool, one of the things that I love most is the amazing range that we have available to us as crafters. You can find wool in virtually any texture, length, color. It takes dye well, both natural and acid dyes, and it's got so many different purposes that it's well suited for. I can't wait to dive in and explore more of these with you in this class.
Before we move any further, let's take a moment and talk about superwash versus non-superwash wools. Non-superwash wools are the primary focus for this course, but I would be amiss if I didn't talk about superwash. Superwash is the process of making wool machine washable and dryable. Wool naturally has scales on each individual fiber. These scales cause felting when they open and attach to each other in high heat with friction. Superwashing is the process of adding a biopolymer coating or to chemically burn off the scales to make the wool smooth. This keeps it from felting. Usually, this wool is very round to add structure since the crimp and bounce have been changed. It does take dyes very nicely. Think about the difference between how color looks on a glossy piece of magazine paper versus a matte magazine. Neither is more beautiful than the other, but one will definitely grab you quickly. Contrary to popular belief, superwash does not release microplastics, but it is also a semi-unnecessary process that adds rather than celebrates the natural textures of wool. These wools I'm showing you now are all superwash, but none of the wools featured in your workbook are superwashed.
Micron count is a system of measurement on the diameter or fineness of a fiber. This is not a reliable flock-to-flock or year-to-year system. It's just a range. But some companies will designate their micron count on their label. 17 to 22 is considered fine. 23 to 31 is considered medium. 32 to 37 is considered coarse. And 38 over is very coarse. Just because it's labeled fine doesn't mean you can wear it next to skin, and just because it's not labeled fine doesn't mean you can't. It's going to be about your own personal preferences, how soft something feels to you. Fiber grows on the sheep every year, and the sheep must be shorn sometimes twice a year. Only feral sheep breeds and hair sheep do not need shearing. Small sheep fleeces can be around 2 or 4 pounds, while some larger breeds can be 10 or 12 or even 15 pounds in a single fleece. If you're interested in soft yarns to try, I would recommend Cormo, Delaney Merino, Merino, Polworth, Rambouillet, Targhee. For level 2 step up, I would recommend Blueface Leicester, Columbia, Corriedale, Romney, Shetland, and Cheviot. Go up one more level, and I think you should try Border Leicester, Gotland, Leicester Long Wool, Dorset, or Charolais. And if you're really interested in trying something new, Lincoln, Wensleydale, Teeswater, Cotswold, and Whiteface Woodland, which I will introduce to you near the end of this presentation.
When exploring wool through yarn, we want to pay attention to all the clues given to us on what the yarn will do best. The first clue is whether or not the yarn has been worsted or woolen spun. Woolen spun fiber is yarn that has been spun from carded roving. Carded roving or carded rolags are prepared with all of the fibers headed in different directions. This creates a loftier yarn that collects more air in between the individual fibers. Worsted spun yarns are spun from top that has been combed all in a single direction, kind of like when you comb your hair. It results in a smoother and often more drapey finished yarn. The next clue to look for is ply. Here are 3 different finishes for 100% merino wool yarn. The woolfolk at the top is a chain ply designed to add durability and resilience to the ultra soft fiber while keeping the hand squishy and soft like most people are hoping for when they use a merino. The next yarn is Wool Dreamers and features multiple plies on a Spanish merino yarn. This adds durability in the sense that there will be fewer spaces for those short fibers to slip out from, but it takes away some of the softness of the hand, especially in the hank. Last, a very tight 2-ply from Handspun Hope shows us what a beaded yarn would look like, or yarn with very, very tight twist and a looser single. This gives the handspun look, but also creates a rustic, thick and thin look in the finished material, which will be quite dense because of how tightly this yarn has been spun. Here are some handspun yarn examples from my stash. Each features a different wool, but all have been prepared in a 2-ply. Can you tell the visual differences just by looking at the hanks? Here are 2 shawls knit with roughly the same pattern and gauge. How about the difference in drape between these 2 hand-spun yarns used for the center portion of the shawl? As you can see, the golden glowing orange one has a lot more drape and a lot more shine. This is a Blueface Leicester wool. The other fiber is a mixed wool and has less shine and more of a matte finish, along with a sturdier, more structured hand. Here are some more evidence swatch samples. Both of these yarns are wool. The first is a very fluffy wool featuring Coopworth and Finn, 2 soft but also dense wools. It creates a thicker, denser swatch that definitely isn't going to let any air through the finished piece. The second swatch features 100% Gotland, which is a long wool. Knit at the same gauge, you can see through the Gotland yarn, but it's going to be quite warm thanks to the halo that this yarn will have after some wear and blocking. Now we're going to take a look at some specific and interesting single breed yarns from my stash. Merino wool is the most popular and easily accessible wool fiber in the world. Merino lines began when the Spanish imported rams from Africa's Beni Marinas tribe. They crossed these sheep with their Spanish ewes to form the Merino breed named for that tribe. In the Middle Ages, Spain had the best wool in Europe and very tight lockdown. Eventually, they began trading with other royal families in the 1700s. In the late 1700s, Vermonter William Jarvis would import 3,500 Portuguese Merinos to the USA. From here, the breed would spread throughout the Americas. Merino worldwide has varied texture and fineness. You can explore some of these textures through the Merino Around the World path in your workbook. Universally, Merinos are dense and lanolin-heavy fleeces with a short stable fiber that can make it hard to spin for beginners, but is also what lends it its incredible softness. I love Merino for its matte finish, visual texture, and how squishy soft it is, of course.
So why are Merinos so popular? Well, part of it is how common they are to find. Almost every continent in the world has some variation of a Merino sheep breed from Merino bloodlines. These sheep are soft, they're big, so they produce a lot of wool, and that wool is bright white, making it perfect for dyeing.
The next fiber I'm going to show you is Rambouillet. Some people think of this as French Merino because it comes from French bloodlines that have been crossed with native sheep from France. Merino d'Arles, which you can buy from Rosie Greenwool, and unfortunately I don't have any in my stash to show you, is a more medium than fine, sturdier wool with 18 to 24 microns, loftier, fluffier, and this is one of my favorite fibers for garments. Here I have an example from Farmer's Daughter and also from Modern Daily Knitting. You'll notice the spin is very different on these two fibers. One is spun for softness, while the other is spun to give greater durability to the wool.
The next breed I'm going to show you is Shetland. These are some of my favorite sheep. Lots and lots of brands will advertise their yarn as Shetland to try and advertise that it's for color work knitting, but not all Shetland advertised yarn comes from the Shetland Isles, and it doesn't all feature Shetland sheep. So make sure that Shetland yarns you're buying actually feature Shetland sheep if you're looking for this breed to try. These sheep are from the Shetland Islands and are pretty small, but pretty common throughout the world through non-registered flocks. However, full-blooded documented Shetlands are still listed in the Livestock Conservancy as a breed under concern. They were first brought over to the Shetland Islands by seafaring Scandinavians and possibly also include some Roman bloodlines in their breeding. They come in a massive range of textures and natural tones, as shown here on pages 186 and 187 of the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook. You're going to see a range in fineness flock to flock depending on different breeding choices. White is finer than most other colors, which may have Kemp or even dual-coated fleeces. The official breed standards for Shetlands were not developed until 1927, and many farmers still resist these breed standards since they feel it's breeding out interesting traits and historic value in some of the sheep. These sheep are very small. We're talking 2 to 5 pounds per fleece versus, 30-pound fleeces on some larger sheep. I love the babies especially much because they're just so small. Next, we're going to take a look at a breed that's a little newer to me. This is the Charolais. This breed has French origins from the 19th century and was brought to the Americas in the 90s. It's primarily a meat sheep, and there's no particular wool standard. It varies greatly flock to flock and depending on what the shepherd is breeding for. These sheep have a short staple length of 23 to 27 microns and fluffy, light, white, dense, bouncy fiber. It's not going to be next to skin soft for a lot of us, but I like it enough that I've hand spun some of this fiber from the Hello Yarn Fiber Club for a sweater. If you're looking to explore something different than Merino, I highly recommend Corriedale. Corriedale is the New Zealand version of Merino. It's a dual-purpose breed that was produced by crossing Lincoln, Leicester, and Merino, so Blueface Leicester in this case. It was imported to the USA for the first time in 1914 and has quickly become a favorite in South America and in North America. And a lot of South American wool is Corriedale or Corrie crosses. You might see this referred to as punta or PA wool. It's about 20 to 31 microns on average, which is considered a medium staple length, and that makes it super easy to spin and durable to wear, but I also find it next to skin soft. The natural color range of this sheep is mostly white, but it can also include brown and gray, especially if you find it at local farm. Jacob is a sheep that I'm always interested in exploring more. It's a super interesting looking sheep. It's considered one of the oldest breeds, and it's got this double set of horns that is really striking.
It has a huge range of breed standards, so the textures are not really uniform, but you can find breeders who are producing sheep that have really great fleeces. The fleeces themselves are usually brown and white spotted, and that can result in an oatmeal colored yarn when they're blended together. The fleeces may contain Kemp hairs, which are those longer, kind of hairier hairs, and they can add a little bit of extra roughness, but these are capable of being removed in the skirting process. The micron range for this sheep is 25 to 35. And it's very fun to spin. It's kind of readily available for spinners, not that hard to find if you're a spinner, but much rarer for knitters. Not that many companies are selling Jacob wool. Last, we're going to take a look at a new to me fiber. I'm going to show you guys kind of the thought process, or walk you through the thought process that I have when I encounter a new to me wool. And this one is Whiteface Woodland. So I plan on getting to know this fiber through spinning and then through knitting. Spinning is my favorite way to get deep on fiber textures and learn about how new breed wools to me behave and feel in different preparations, because I can do like a test spin, I can do a little test sample of applying it up in different ways and really get a feel for the breed. This particular breed, according to the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook, comes from the Pennine Mountains in northern England. It's on the Rare Breed Survival Trust because they almost went extinct in 1970. The Rare Breed Survival Trust is kind of like the Livestock Conservancy. And it's a hairy medium weight wool. There's no wool consistency because this is primarily a meat breed, but I do find this pretty soft in the hand. Now I do think it's not going to be next to Skin Soft spun up because the micron count's pretty high. You can see how hairy it is in this video, but it's supposed to be around 28 to 38 microns. So what I've read about this wool is that it's good for highly durable applications, and a lot of people like it for weaving wefts, so I think I'm going to spin it with that in mind. As you in this course with me and you keep digging around, there's some different ways that I think that you can explore wool really easily. First, use that workbook. Dip your toes into different wools. The workbook includes not only the exploration path guides, but also wool description terms. And when viewed digitally, you can even click through to check out different yarns that have specific breed fibers. Another great way to get your wool fix and start exploring is to visit wool shows. 4-H events, fleece judgings, fleece shows can help you learn more about fleeces before and after they're processed, let you see things in person. Viewing only processed wool, processed top, finished yarns doesn't tell you a lot about crimp, but getting your hands on the fleece will. Another way to play around, let's say that you don't have the ability to go to a lot of wool shows, is to try a sampler club for spinners or makers. There are a few different sample clubs out there. You can write me if you'd like to know the names of some, or you could just Google that you're looking for a wool sampler club, trying lots of different wools. You can also ask your yarn store. Sometimes yarn store owners are super knowledgeable in this area. If yours is not, I would suggest looking for a spinning guild or a weaving guild. Spinning guilds tend to know so much about fiber, and that's because spinners, like I've said, are so up close and personal. If you're looking to try a bunch of different wools on a budget, I would check out mills and call and ask if they have any mill ends, or check for mill ends on their website. Usually these are overruns from a customer job that the customer didn't want to pick up, or they might be a wool pool order that had a little left on the end. You never know what you're going to find in mill ends. And just order things, try new things, think about it conscientiously. I personally have a post on my blog called The Single Skein Library that talks about the way that I purchase new to me yarns. And that's by purchasing one single skein and then knitting from it, getting a feel for it, swatching in multiple textures, swatching for multiple patterns. It becomes like a reference for me. And then if I decide that I want to make, a scarf or a hat or, a sweater, I can order more yarn if needed in a color that I'm excited about, or if I've got that yarn already on hand for a small project, I just get started then. So lots and lots of options for you, and that's also a good way to keep your stash smaller while you explore. Most importantly, just never stop playing with new things to discover what you like best. I'm always sharing my own discoveries online through the yarn directory and through my blog,
at slow-knitting.com, and I'm also on Instagram as Hannibal Knits. You can find me on Ravelry as Hannibal, and I can't wait to hear all about your wool adventures. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you around.